Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. If I can call you all to order. The hour is upon us, or the half hour. Welcome to today's meeting of the Planning Committee. My name is Councillor Mike Johnson, and I'm chair of the committee. Spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escapes are clearly signed. Once you have left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall, but you're not allowed into Costa. This is a public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photographing, making an audio recording and providing commentary on the proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting place of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. Members and other speakers are reminded to use the microphone when speaking. Right, before we move to the agenda proper, we have a few introductions to do. On my left, we've got Tom Gabriel, who is the interim senior planner, and Andrew Thompson, who is the interim DM manager. Welcome. You really want to realise what you're getting yourselves into? Right, that having been said, let's move to the agenda. Appointment of substitutes.
We have Councillor Mrs. Lucy Hodgson for Councillor Roberts and Councillor Udall for Councillor Barnes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We may or may not, we certainly won't be seeing Allah Ditter. He's unfortunately had to go at a hasty and arranged funeral. We're not quite sure of Owen Cleary, but he may or may not turn. Declarations of interest? None? Oh, sorry, Richard.
Yeah, just briefly, Chair, you've personal knowledge of one of the objectors who's present today. We were at school together 40 years ago. I don't think that means we have to declare an interest, just declaring a knowledge. I've not discussed the application with him.
Thank you for that. Minutes of the previous meeting. We'll go through them page by page. Page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Really that long a meeting. I shall sign those in a minute. To the agenda proper. Right, we've got Conservation Advisory Panel. Anybody want to make any comments? Happy to receive. Thank you.
I just wondered, have we replaced James Dinn? He was a very valuable officer. Sorry, I've got my reading glasses on. I can see now. Have we replaced James Dinn? He was a very valuable archaeology officer and did some very good work.
Was in there. Got any knowledge, George?
No, we've not. We've reorganised, and so he's not been directly replaced, but we've reorganised below him.
So does that mean who's taking on his duties? Is that Dr. Collins?
Sinn Féin Lan.
Oh, right. Okay. Covered. Yeah. Yep. So are we happy with the Conservation Advisory Panel notes? Cool. Public participation?
No public participation, Chair.
Thank you. Public representation.
Public representation, as per the sheet that I've circulated, we've got speakers on agenda item 11, Paul Chambers and Kevin Ruff, as objectors. Nick Carroll, who's the agent for the applicant, is Nick Carroll Architects. And agenda item 7, we have Ms. Jan Scrine, objector on behalf of local residents, and Jonathan Adams from Tetlow King Planning, who's the agent for the applicant. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We're somewhat limited for space. We're going to go to agenda item 11 first, which is the Rose Villa application. So I don't know which of you wants to come first, Paul Chambers or Nick Carroll. Take the seat. Yeah. Before you speak, we're going to present.
In respect to this application, what we've have received is a number of objections from neighbouring properties in relation to this application, who raise concerns that some elements that have taken, some changes that have taken place on site haven't been picked up in the application that's currently before us. Obviously, in response to those concerns which were raised, we then went out on site and in fact confirmed that some of the changes that have taken place haven't been regularised through this submission. We've also noted that there's a slight anomaly in one of the plans. So what we're suggesting is that rather than this being determined today, that we were suggesting that it be deferred to allow the application to be taken away to pick up these small changes that have also been added, and also to pick up the slight anomaly in the plan, so we can bring it back to committee at a future date to make sure that we're picking everything up and members get to consider every change that's being put forward. Otherwise, it's likely to result in, if it's determined today, another application coming in to try and regularise another element of it. So I think it's, so what we're saying is that you can determine it as you see fit, but officers are suggesting that allows this to be to go away and make sure everything's picked up, and we then determine it all in one go.
Thank you, Sim. I mean, personally, from sitting in this chair, I think that's a really good idea, because otherwise this thing's going to keep bouncing back and back and back. Clearly, I need members to go along with that or otherwise object.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I agree. I think Mr. Mann has made a sensible suggestion. I just think it's unfortunate that we're actually doing it because of the yet another retrospective application. I mean, it seems to be, it's quite extraordinary in that they clearly know the rules. They keep breaking them. That being the case, I think Mr. Mann is right, because there will almost certainly be future other retrospectives. So let's deal with them all in one go, by which time they probably would have done what they want anyway.
I would certainly support that, and I totally agree with Councillor Amos on this one.
We're happy to go with that proposal, that this item gets deferred. Take that as agreed. It does mean you have another opportunity when this report comes back, hopefully for the last time, to this committee, to register your objections. You don't need to speak today, but thank you. Which is 15 Darwin Avenue. Tom's going to present and then I'll call you to the table.
Good afternoon. Right, an application for the demolition of 3 dwellings and the erection of 50 affordable dwellings with public open space and associated developments, including the rerouting of a public footpath. Members will recall that an application on the site for the same development was considered at the committee meeting of the 24th of June of this year, with the exception of the enhanced planting. The details of the scheme are exactly the same, with the additional planting being an additional 39 specimen trees and a number of native tree and shrub belts. The principle of the development has been accepted as the site is allocated in the existing and emerging plans, and it is officer opinion that the additional planting is sufficient to address the concerns that were raised at the previous meeting. The application is accordingly recommended for approval, subject to the conditions as laid out in the report.
For that, I'd like to come to the table.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry that I'm here again, but thank you very much for giving me the time. I won't go over the stuff that we've covered in the past. Do you remember that there were suggestions that this was a good application because there was too much green space in the area? I think that's been put away now. And then it was suggested that it was a windfall site. Well, we looked at the SWDP definitions and that's been put aside. So a new application has come, and I'm not going to mark your card, Chair. Too much respect for that. And you'll decide whether the application is premature in terms of the SWDP revision or whether it's a case of overdevelopment. But my purpose is to come as the local member and just relay the local feelings, as this is in my ward, but also neighbours onto the Rongswood ward. And so there's a little bit of feeling coming from there as well. They understand that the committee was minded to refuse an application, and then after due consideration, looked at it again and refused that application. They don't understand why what is essentially the same application as was considered previously now comes back for the committee's consideration again. In fact, the feeling is that this is towards being in contempt of the committee. They intuitively believe it's wrong, but there's a point to be made. It might be that those who are preparing this application now believe there's a level of opposition fatigue. And I think that's where I can make a contribution to tell you that's absolutely not the case. And I can back that up with records of telephone calls and emails. The feeling remains that the application threatens a treasured piece of land, and before it is approved, it should conform to the development plan, and it should then be considered on its merits. And in doing that so, it should have regard for the impact on the environment, the biodiversity, and the well-being of people who live in this area. So if I can dare to speak on behalf of a few people from Rongswood as well, I will do, but on behalf of the people of Ward and Parish South, this is an incredibly important issue. Thank you for your time, Chair.
Thank you for that. Any questions for?
Thank you, Andy. I'm just looking at page 14, where it says that the site is already accepted as for development, and 61 houses for 100 houses altogether. It's part of a larger site for 100, and 61 have already been built. So do you feel that the residents would be happy to have the other 39? Do you feel it's a case of the number of dwellings or dwellings at all?
Chair, this numbers business is incredibly difficult. If you look, my interpretation is that the site has been stretched so that you've got more housing than would be allowed by the SWDP, but it provides the open space needed, and it does that by extending the site. So it doesn't conform entirely to the SWDP. The anticipation on the developers, as if I can see what they're saying, their anticipation is that when it comes to review of the SWDP, they'll say, "Oh, that's fine," you know. But we all joined in the training. We had our training a few months ago now, and I specifically asked this question about whether it would be premature to make a judgment on the revision, and I was told that is the case. So in these circumstances, the local people for you to be right.
Ms. Scrine. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair and Committee members, for allowing me to address you again on behalf of the local residents. We were most disappointed that Bromford has brought this back, dressed up as a new application when you've already rejected it. We are also appalled that they are wasting the city's time and money by appealing your decision as well simultaneously, maybe to coerce you to change your minds when considering this replicated application. It still falls on the two major aspects, the residential allocation and the environment. As Councillor Roberts says, firstly, the original application was already in breach of the SWDP, and it relied on the potential allocation of an additional site, land grab, in the emerging SWDPR. Things have moved on since it came up originally in the past 12 months. As you know, the ratification of the SWDPR is now unlikely for 2023. Lots of things can happen in the meantime. Secondly, dealing with council, the triangle of land allocated under the existing SWDP is a remnant of the adjacent Stapleford development, one houses, and it was originally intended that development's mitigation, it's green 40%. It was the 5th tee of the old Tolladine golf course. That was a boggy area. It's got large mature trees and they're over 50 years old. It's really unsuitable for dense development. It does provide a home, varied wildlife, and a joy for the walkers from the local housing estate. However, in the application before you today, developers still want to implement their scorched earth policy. They want to raise the site, now to plant a few more saplings, and that takes management, on the unallocated land, supposedly in mitigation for destroying all those TPO mature trees. You'll recall that in the last 2 years, the City Council has declared a climate emergency, biodiversity emergency, as well as producing an environmental sustainability. In no way is this application in accordance with such aspirations or policies. Furthermore, the Environment Act became law just a couple of weeks ago. This will require developers to demonstrate a 10% biodiversity net gain in any plan, which this application does not. The government's encouraging us to build back better, more sustainability with new design codes in preparation. This barrack block is a poorly designed scheme on all counts. Hideous, it wrecks the landscape, not attractive development. The developers have ignored our requests to work with the landscape and its features within the existing regulatory framework. Had they done so, we wouldn't need to be speaking against this again.
Very much. Members, questions? Brian? Amos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one. Ms. Scrine, I congratulate you on a very powerful presentation. Thank you. You say this is largely the same application. Do you, from your point of view, see any differences at all of any significance?
Replace the huge mature trees. If you look at the photographs of that site, you will see enormous trees and a few saplings dying. It's not biodiversity.
Joe?
Thank you. Could I ask Mr. Manley about the comments made by Andy Roberts about a decision on the revised plan? Because Andy seemed to say that we were being premature and that, you know, it wasn't a good basis for making a decision about the development. Plus, in section 5.4 of the report, it says the planning history of the site is a significant material planning consideration in the assessment of this application. Is that because it's been refused once, or is that because this land is allocated for development? I'd just like a bit of explanation on that, that phrase, please.
Thank you. In answer to your question, I think there was a couple of things that came up in what Councillor Roberts was talking about. There's an amended scheme to come in, and in terms of that, they can actually put in an identical scheme or almost identical scheme twice, and after they do, if that gets refused by the authority, they can't do it again. We can decline to deal with the application. So that's talking about the fatigue. So there are mechanisms within the planning legislation to preclude multiple applications coming in. This is within the limits of that, because this is on the back of a previous application. So they come in with an amended scheme, which is almost identical, other than it's got more planting. In terms of the prematurity element, what we were talking about was the fact that the plan is, the SWDPR is at Reg 18 stage at this moment in time, and it carries limited weight because it hasn't gone into the Reg 19 stage. And the advice we gave you last time at the committee was that yes, it is in the local plan, it is being identified, but however, that carries very limited weight in the decision that you subsequently make. Turning to your point regarding planning history, yes, planning history is a material planning consideration. It is a material planning consideration to the determination of the application, because with respect to this application, a very similar scheme was refused by this committee for the particular reason given on page 5, paragraph 5.3 on page 22. Obviously, that was contrary to the officer's recommendation. The officer's recommendation comes forward because we as officers thought the scheme was acceptable before. It's come in with an enhanced planting scheme. And again, obviously the recommendation from officers is basically that it's acceptable, and that's why it's coming forward to you for a recommendation. Obviously, the decision that you need to make in looking at this application is as to whether or not the reason for refusal, which is on page 5.3, and assessing the whole of the application, but obviously with respect to the previous reason for refusal that members gave in relation to this development, whether or not the enhanced planting has actually overcome your previous concern in relation to this development, because the difference between the two is the planting. So that's for you to make, and that's a decision for you to make. It is obviously a planning consideration.
Thank you, Sim. Any other questions? Scrine? Thank you very much. We now have Jonathan Adams from Tetlow King Planning on behalf of the applicant.
Good afternoon. Bromford owns over 44,000 homes and has relationships with more than 100,000 customers. Within Worcester, Bromford manages about 250 homes and supports over 600 people. Bromford exists to provide affordable homes for people who can't access market housing. Last year, Bromford delivered over 1,000 houses. Bromford's role is to provide safe, secure and warm homes, and through its neighbourhood coaches focuses on the positives in people and what they can do rather than what they can't. There is an urgent need for affordable homes in Worcester for its residents. In 2019, average property price. The average property price was around 7 times average earnings in the city. This has risen significantly from 4.2 times average earnings 20 years ago. This means that a growing number of people are struggling to access suitable housing in the open market, and affordable housing provision is increasingly important. This is supported by your housing officer. Worcester's Strategic Housing Market Assessment shows that at the time of writing, there were very close to 4,000 local households in need who cannot afford to buy or rent on the open market in Worcester. This proposal for 35 social rented and 15 shared ownership units will be a significant contribution to the affordable housing offer in the city. This revised proposal, in direct response to Planning Committee's comments on the previous application with regards to visual views into the site from the development, this application scheme has been amended to deliver a significantly enhanced number and greater number and variety of trees and planting, providing more habitats for ecology and improved screening of development. The previous scheme proposed 50 native trees and shrubs of a variety of species. This revised scheme will deliver nearly double that, 89 trees, a native tree and shrub belts, wide range of ornamental shrubs, native hedgerows, and marginal and aquatic plants. These enhancements are supported by your tree officer. With regards to planning policy, the principle of housing development at the site, in our opinion, is acceptable because the entire site is within Worcester's settlement boundary, where housing development is supported by the adopted and emerging development plans. And most of the site, in any case, is allocated for housing in the adopted development. The emerging development plan continues to allocate the entire site with an indicative figure of 43 houses. As the numbers in both plans are specifically stated to be indicative, it's been agreed by your planning officers that this proposal for net 47 dwellings on the site is in line with the allocation and is appropriate development. Only a small part of the site is designated as accessible natural green space. This revised proposal fully accords with South Worcestershire Development Policy 38B because the council's own South Worcestershire Open Space Assessment, which was updated this year, demonstrates an excess of accessible natural green space of more than 70 hectares in the city. In Warden Parish South, it also shows that there is an oversupply of amenity green space of 1.5 hectares. Importantly, although the site is designated as accessible natural green space, it is only accessible because the landowner allows it. Other than the footpaths, it is private land, not public open space. In contrast, this proposal would provide open space areas that will be kept permanently available for local residents and would be maintained by Bromford in accordance with planning conditions if approved. The adoption of the development plan review has been delayed, but that does not mean that the need for affordable homes has been delayed. I respectfully request that members endorse your officer's recommendation for the third time to resolve to approve the revised application. Excuse me. The previous proposal is currently at appeal, which you are aware of, and the inspector has been notified that an application for a full award of costs will be made against the council. For your information, in the event that this revised proposal with improved landscaping is granted, Bromford will withdraw that appeal and application for costs. There was a remark about prematurity. Whilst the whole application site is not yet allocated, prematurity is not a reason to refuse permission of this development, in our opinion. As set out in the committee report, the MPPF is clear that prematurity is only a justifiable reason for refusal in limited circumstances, which do not exist in this case.
Thank you for that. Members, questions for the agent?
Thank you. As was indicated earlier, I'm a substitute member, so I haven't seen plans before this meeting. So I'd like some information from you. You used a lot of sales talk about the need for affordable housing, but can you actually clarify what you mean by affordable housing on the site? Would there be housing? Would it be housing for rent, or would it be joint ownership, or would it be affordable housing in the form of cheaper housing? Because affordable housing can mean many things. What reality it means to the people who can't afford it could still be the same.
The affordable homes would be in accordance with the definition of affordable housing and they would be secured as affordable homes in the Section 106 agreement that would be agreed with the City Council. So it would have to meet the requirements of the City Council, the definition of affordable homes. The proposal, which would be secured in the Section 106 agreement, is for 35 social rented homes defined as affordable and 15 shared ownership homes defined as affordable.
Councillor Amos.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Adams, can you just explain why it is that you are going for 50 dwellings? Because the officers make it clear in paragraph 2 that even in relation to an emerging SWDP2 is in excess of that. It's in excess of SWDP that we've got and in the emerging SWDP. So you're asking for more than is already in that. But why are you going for that particular number rather than sticking within the number of 100 dwellings, which would leave 39? But you seem to be insisting on going above even what an emerging policy is dictating.
There's additional families, individuals who are on the housing register waiting affordable homes. Those additional houses are for them. And if that site is capable of accommodating additional homes, which we consider it does, then we should be making the most efficient use of that land to deliver more affordable homes for those residents of Worcester.
Thank you. So you're actually saying that we should ignore planning policy for that reason?
No, the sites within the settlement boundary of Worcester, where the principle of housing is acceptable and there is an affordable housing need, which is not disputed by your housing officers. And in our opinion, we do meet the requirements of planning policy in the adopted South Worcestershire Development Plan, which supports a proposal for housing on the site. The density of the site is not very high. I think it's 28 dwellings per hectare.
The final point, Mr. Chairman, is Ms. Scry made a comment which I didn't pursue, but you have said today that if we approve this today, you will withdraw your appeal. Sounds a bit like a threat to me, Mr. Adams. I don't think that's very helpful. We don't proceed on that basis.
Would you like me to respond to that? Yeah, it's not meant as a threat. The fact is that this proposal would deliver greater and enhanced landscaping than the previous proposal. On behalf of Bromford, I'm able to confirm that the appeal that is submitted at the moment will be withdrawn if this is approved. If not, then that appeal will not be withdrawn, and that would be determined by the inspector.
Right, Mr. Chairman, I would presumably you would advise the committee to ignore that kind of statement, and Mr. Manny would as well. Is that true?
Certainly, I was going to make the comment. It sounded like a threat.
I think the point about it is that if the applicant or the agent decide to go for, it's entirely within their decision to whether or not they wish to go to appeal, and it's entirely within their decision for them as to whether or not they go for a case of costs against the council. Obviously, the council will put up its own defence against that if this application if this application is not approved and they do not remove their or lift their and pursue the appeal. So it's a statement of fact from council in that respect.
Councillor Hodgson.
I'd just like to pursue your statement about the oversupply in Warden Parish south of the green natural green space, and why you consider it's viable or whatever to reduce it almost.
So the council's policy, the South Worcestershire adopted South Worcestershire Development Plan policy 38B criteria 2. It permits housing on, it permits the loss of accessible green space where there is a surplus identified by an accepted survey report. And the council, this council, actually has produced its own assessment of open space, the South Worcestershire Open Space Assessment. And it's that document, which was updated this year, meets the requirement of that policy because it is a credible resource for assessing the amount of open space. It's not a report that the applicant has attempted to prepare by the South Worcestershire authorities. Our position is that that open space assessment satisfies policy 38B criteria 2. At the previous planning committee, your officer in June identified that a significant degree of open space was available locally, but then the officer suggested that this only applied to open space and, well, specified as open space and green space. And of course, the officer recommended approval anyway, but the distinction was not, in our opinion, entirely not incorrect, because that open space assessment refers very clearly to South Worcestershire Development Policy 38 space, which must mean green space in its definition. And that's set out in that assessment, in that open space assessment. And its map at Appendix 1 clearly includes the application site as accessible natural green space. The open space assessment, updated this year, shows an excess of accessible natural green space of 70.74 hectares across the city. And it breaks that down, and in Warden Parish South, it shows that there is an oversupply of amenity green space at 1.46 hectares. That's not a figure that we've assessed, that's a figure that we've extracted from the council's own assessment, and it's identified as oversupply.
Any more questions for them? Oh, thank you. My opening comment when I read the paper was, has there been enough change to this application to convince members? I give it to you. Do you believe there's been enough? Because we've refused this once. Has it moved far enough?
I'm looking at 5.3, and the reason that we gave before for refusing this application. I didn't actually vote to refuse, but I'm looking at I sort of take collective responsibility for what the committee decided. And I'm looking at SW38 states that the development of green space will not be permitted other than in exceptional circumstances. So I'm looking at this from a point of view of, do we have exceptional circumstances here to build on this green space? Now, we've heard the figures that Bomford Housing has given, that there are 4,000 households in this city that need a home. And here we have the opportunity to give 50 of them a home. And a home that's warm and safe and secure is a basic necessity for any person to be able to live a proper life, to be able to get a job, to be able to think about anything higher on Maslow's triangle than your basic needs, which are the very bottom. And the part of Worcester that I represent does have a lot of households who are waiting, who may be in some sort of accommodation, but are waiting for proper accommodation. Families with children in accommodation, which is second, third floor. And what I'm thinking here is there exceptional circumstances to build on this green space? And to me, the fact that there are 4,000 households who don't have a proper home in this city is exceptional. And these are exceptional circumstances. And so I will be voting in favour of this, because I believe that that is important. That, to me, is the most important thing about this application, that those 50 households will have a home.
Thank you, Joe. Pat?
Thank you. I will admit that affordable housing is a huge priority, but exceptional circumstances doesn't equal affordable housing. Exceptional circumstances, or the interpretation that I understand of it, is that more green space needs to be provided somewhere. Now, nearby, I mean, you've only considered so far Warndon villages and so forth, but I live towards the Tolladine End area, the Tolladine Road area. And what I know about that area and the Rose Avenue area is that it's a very low income area. And the children there lead very urbanized lifestyles. They have no opportunity to access green space except this one. They're nowhere near any other green space. This is it. If we take that away, they won't go sledging in winter. They won't go running about having wild play area or anything like that. It won't be available to them. And that's a serious problem too. So I don't think exceptional circumstances have been demonstrated, and I don't think planting a few more trees will actually make it any better. What's needed there is open green space. There is wildlife in that area, quite a bit of it, which will be displaced or destroyed. There are a number of things like foxes and green woodpeckers, other woodpeckers as well, that I have seen in the area. It's an area that I used to walk through quite a lot on my way either to the hospital or county hall. So it's one with which I'm very familiar. Obviously, there are a lot of dog walkers about, and that, again, is their only green space. That worries me, because I don't think this application has changed much. And to actually say there's an oversupply of green space only refers to the other side, the Warndon side. It doesn't refer to these people at all. So I think an error of judgment has been committed, really, in the survey of this area. Also, on top of that, the emerging SWDP review is not at a stage where it is really able to carry a great deal of weight. And I would say that part of this area was forced onto that agenda, and councillors, not only at a previous meeting, had not even heard what the review was doing, because most of them hadn't seen it. Only those of us who sit on the joint advisory panel knew about it. So now we know about it. What I'm saying to you all is I think that section of land, the additional section of land, was a mistake. And I certainly wouldn't like to see it added on or confirmed in the review. But as I say, it carries limited weight at this stage. So I think actually that's something I won't consider. I think you've got the message. I really don't like this application.
Thank you, Pat.
If it assists members, I just wanted to clarify you the wording from the SWDP, which actually specifies the exceptional circumstances. So the first one is that the proposal is for a community or recreational use that does not compromise the essential quality quality and character of the green. The second one is that an assessment of community and technical need clearly demonstrates that the green space is surplus to requirements. The third one is that the alternative or replacement green space of at least equivalent value to the community has been secured in a suitable location. So it does define what the exceptional circumstance.
Any further questions, Alan?
Mr. Chairman, thank George for that clarification that it's not exceptional circumstances. Can I just say, Councillor Aguilar, I agree with everything she said. I think she said it in a very balanced way. So thank you, Pat, for that. This application, Mr. Chairman, bothers me really for two reasons. First of all, on the procedure and also on the merits of it. It is in fact the same application, which we've refused twice. Planning permission has got to be given according to some rules and regulations with a dose of judgment and common sense. We can't have planning applications being decided by attrition. In other words, you don't get, you keep putting another one in and then you appeal that one and put another one and then say, well, if you don't get this, I'll withdraw the appeal and all this kind of nonsense. Got to be done according to the rules. The numbers are, as a matter of fact, Mr. Chairman, are greater in the emerging SWDP. So even if we went with the emerging SWDP, what I call SWDP2, it's still more than that. So I'm baffled. What's the point of revising the current one to increase the new one and then go beyond that anyway? And when this first came to committee, before we refused it the first time, we were misled, frankly, by the weight we were supposed to be giving to an emerging policy, which, as has been said, is now being delayed till 2023, 2 years away. So I agree with Councillor Agar. I don't see what weight we can put on that. If we now, there's another issue here, Mr. Chairman. If we now approve this, bearing in mind it's virtually the same application, we are doing what I keep criticising us for doing, which is the policy of anything goes. You've got to have some rules and stick to them. Otherwise, forget the rules and we'll just have a general discussion and see how we feel on the day. But if my words aren't good enough, I mean, that's fine. The officer says in his conclusion, paragraph 8.1, and I'll read it out because it's relevant. The proposal is the same as the scheme refused under application 20-00632 by the Planning Committee on the 24th of June 2021, with the exception of the enhanced landscaping scheme. And from what I've heard, I don't think it's much of an enhancement. According to Councillor Agar, who knows the area, it's anything but an enhancement. It will detract. The report then goes on to say, there have been no changes in the site circumstances and no material changes to the relevant policy considerations in the intervening period. Frankly, Mr. Chairman, that says it all. And therefore, I move refusal on the grounds for the same reasons that we refused the previous one, because it's the same application.
Thank you, Councillor Amos. Any other comments or questions? Marjorie.
Thank you, Chair. I just like to reinforce the clear message that we should be refusing this application when you look at paragraph 5.3, where our reasons for refusing it last time are laid out, and there's no reference there to the tree planting scheme. We didn't refuse it last time because there weren't enough trees. We refused it last time for this particular set of reasons, and I think they still hold. I do totally agree that we need more affordable housing, but I don't think this is the right scheme to provide it. Thank you.
Thank you, Marjorie. Councillor, you.
Yeah, forgive me, Chair. I'm trying to look through the conditions as I'm speaking to you, and I can find under condition 6 on page 34 details about hours on delivery vehicles will come and so forth. I see no conditions being suggested about limiting the hours of operation of construction itself. For instance, nighttime working, weekend working and things like that. That does concern me, and I would seek some clarification on what would be permissible and what would not be permissible. And also the fact that social housing as been described here is 19 times more likely to die in a house fire in such a property. And I see no inclusion of any sprinkler devices to be fitted to these houses, which would be a significant benefit and a safety feature. I wonder if anything like that could actually be conditioned to secure safety within the properties, which would enable sprinklers to be fitted.
Thank you for that. Do you want to deal with that now, or do we want to move to, we've already got a proposal for refusal.
Safety elements of it are covered under the building control regime. It's not part of planning, so we wouldn't be able to impose the controls through the planning side of it. That would be coming out through different legislation, and it'd have to meet fire regulations. And in terms of the hours of operation, if members were minded to approve the application and they wish to see specific hours of construction being imposed as part of a construction management plan, that's we can quite happily do that, so it's not a problem.
Sorry, I'm aware that the fire regulations comes under building control, but I'm not necessarily talking about fire regulations. I'm talking about a condition which would enable sprinklers to be fitted, which would not be currently a regulation. Fire regulation issue, it's over and above that. So it's not standard building regulations. It's something which would actually benefit the community. We could do, as I understand it, through a planning condition, which could not be actually enforced through building regulations.
The planning conditions are imposed in relation to planning applications, but they have to be framed by policy within our local plan. And if there isn't a policy there to do that, then we wouldn't be able to impose that control. You could seek to impose it because that's your role here. I'm not sure how defensible it would be to appeal, is what I'm trying to say.
Thank you. Mel?
Chair, thank you. I'm not sure if we can ask this, so we don't answer that. But obviously, if we go ahead and we refuse it today, bearing in mind there is an appeal ongoing, do we have an assessment, or do we know how that appeal is likely to go, or is it just not possible? No, or can we make a judgment?
Have we got an intelligence?
I can't answer that question. I think what you're saying is that the application was put forward by officers of recommendation for approval, and the previous application was refused. We did when we went through the minded to process last time, when we brought it back under the procedure that we're still actually bound by. We did say that obviously there is a risk that it could go to appeal, because have a duty to say that. The previous refusal was a planning balance. It was your decision as to whether or not you considered that loss was outweighed by the benefits. And that will be the case of the appeal. It's very difficult. Officers are recommending for approval. Members are saying, no, we don't agree with you. It is a planning balance, and it would be what the inspector decided to how they wish to go with it, really. Other than that, I can't really give you any more than that, really.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sim. Just a comment, I sympathise with Joe's view of the world, that we are in need of social housing. There's no doubt. And in fact, first time round, I didn't vote for refusal. But as I say, my opening comment was, has the applicant done enough based on the previous to this one in front of us? And my view is, no, they haven't. We have a proposal for refusal. Yeah, we can go straight to refusal. We don't need to be minded to refuse. Fair to play. Sorry, Lucy.
I really do. This exceptional circumstances over the green space. I think I agree with Pat that it isn't exceptional. And it really isn't. And it's too important to lose.
My fault. Thank you. So we have a proposal from Councillor Amos for refusal. For a seconder. Lucy?
So the proposal is to refuse the application on the grounds set out in paragraph 3 of the report, which was the same refusal as the previous time. All those in favour of refusal? 3, 4, 5, 6. All those against refusal? 2. And any abstentions? The application has been refused.
I was good. Are members happy that we don't actually go to a formal proposal, given that we had this last month? I think most of us sat through it last month. Yeah. Are we too cold is the question. They've been open for ventilation, but Pat's obviously feeling it. You get the draft. I was going to say, do you want to change places? Right. The window is closed. Hopefully we'll warm up. Over to you, Sally.
Good afternoon. This application was referred to the meeting of the Planning Committee on the 28th of October 2021, where it was deferred minded to refuse contrary to officer's recommendation on grounds of lack of amenity for proposed residents in terms of lack of external amenity space. Sorry. The relationship with the public realm and concern it will lead to noise and disturbance and overlooking or a perception of overlooking from passing pedestrian traffic. The officer report for this item in Section 106 agreement is included as Appendix 1 within the agenda. The application is for 24 1- and 2-bed units at Unit 7 St Martin's Gate, and it includes Units 7A, 7B, 7C and 7D, which is currently occupied as a lab books. It's the opinion, on balance, that the adverse impacts of the development would not amount to significant and demonstrable degree of harm that outweigh the benefits of the proposal, with 24 units of accommodation being provided in the buildings which are currently vacant without active use for the most part. However, I appreciate that it is prerogative of the Planning Committee to apply a different weighting to their decision-making and reach a contrary decision. A reason for refusal based on the previous committee meeting discussion is provided in 5.1 of the report.
Minds or wish to offer a different opinion? Do you just want to consider the reason for refusal? Councillor Amos.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, one tries to be consistent, and therefore I would maintain my position of a refusal for the reasons we've already discussed. And I think there's a central point here, though, Mr. Chairman, and I suspect it's going to be a bigger issue as we go along over the years. like everybody else around this room, every kid, every child has a right to start life with fair opportunities and in a decent environment. It's essential. We strive to achieve that for every single kid in Worcester. But the problem is, we should not be building or encouraging the building what I will regard as future Victorian slums. Page 45, under paragraph 3.8, really, for my mind, sums it all, why we should be refusing this. All family homes require a private garden that is sufficiently sized to allow for seating and play. As a minimum, you know, that we could argue about how much of it there is, but there must be some provision for this. Otherwise, what you're doing is bringing up children in a hostile environment in which they're not going to learn and develop properly. It is simply not fair. So we've got to address this issue. You know, and we're talking 24 flats, 10 or 2 bedroom. How many people, how many children will that be? So, and paragraph 3.12 really asks the fundamental question. Members must balance whether the lack of private amenity space in a town centre is a reasonable ground for refusal. And my answer is, yes, of course. Of course it is a reasonable ground for refusal. Just because people live in a city centre, are we saying that they should be deprived of amenity space and no gardens? So the kids there are automatically disadvantaged because they happen to live in a town centre. I mean, it's an absurd question, to be honest, Mr. Chairman, because it seems the answer seems self-evident to me. We must be providing, whatever we do, amenity space to bring up kids in a decent environment, not build these, you know, rabbit hutches and these places that will become slums of the future, because requirements will change, specifications will change, and these will all be inadequate. Just as, you know, the Victorian ones are inadequate because they had outside loos instead of indoor ones. So, you know, standards change, and I think we must prepare ourselves for that and not allow this kind of thing to go ahead, because I'm sure there'll be future similar applications, but we need to take a stand on this and provide decent accommodation, not just as much as we can cram in.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, Worcester isn't Tokyo or London, you know, we do really expect some amenity space for residents, and it's extremely stingy in this case. But what concerns me even more is in paragraph 3.4, it claims that this is a semi-public venue, and it's not. It's a very public venue. I mean, if you've ever seen the crowds going past to Asda on a Saturday morning, you'd know. And on a Friday too. I mean, a lot of the week, it's a very, very busy space. It's the bottom floor that I have an objection to, next to that heavily used pedestrianised area. And that's the main problem. As I say, Councillor Amos is quite right about the very small amount of amenity space. Ideally, I'd like to see more.
Thank you, Pat. Richard?
I really do love listening to Councillor Amos and his emotional language. It's certainly very entertaining. And I have to say that although some of the language may be interesting in its tone, I have to say that on this occasion I agree with him. And it comes to me, if I want to make an observation about my love for folk music, there are 2 songs which come to mind. One by Pete Seeger, who talks about little boxes, and they're all the same. And that is a clear indication that this is just a number of little boxes. You can have a blue one, pink one, yellow one, blue one, but they're all little boxes and they're all the same. And the most important aspect is another good piece of folk music, Bread and Roses. Yes, we fight for bread, but we want roses too. And the people here have the right, who potentially could be living in these properties, have the right to have their own amenity space. And its failure to provide that would be a critical error on our part to allow that to happen without providing that kind of facilities. I'm sure there will be imaginative ways to enable that to happen. It's just that the applicant doesn't choose to make that happen within the scheme with the application. So on that grounds, my position remains the same as it was at last meeting. I would oppose.
Pat?
He's right. If there were a roof garden, I might feel differently.
Any more contributions? Mel?
Chair, yeah, thank you. Just quickly, I just agree with everything that's been said. And I think if lockdown taught us one thing, it is the importance of open space and amenities and having a garden. And I wouldn't wish anyone not to have that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We're all done. There's been a proposal from Councillor Amos to refuse. So we have a motion to refuse, which has been seconded. All those in favour of refusal? And it would be on the basis of 5.1. Yep. Yep. We move on to agenda item 9, which perversely is also going to talk about little boxes, but you know. But what can you do with a listed building? Over to you, Tom.
Not the inside out,
Good afternoon again. This application is for a mixed-use refurbishment in the commercial use Class C at ground floor and with 13 studio flats. The site is located in the city centre, in an area comprising a variety of uses, including commercial, restaurant, retail and residential. The building is Grade 2 listed in the Foregate Street and Tithing Conservation Area. The building has been in office use since at least 1964, but it's been vacant for at least the last 2 years. The site is in a sustainable town centre location, where local and national policy encourages the use or reuse of such sites. The form of development proposed, commercial with residential on the above floors, is commonly seen form of development in town centre locations such as this. The principal development is therefore considered acceptable. The benefits of the development include bringing this vacant building back, vacant listed building, back into viable use, thereby preventing its potential decay and providing housing in a sustainable town centre location, assisting the regeneration of the city centre and contributing towards sustainable development. With regards to the impact upon the listed building, the application proposes the removal of internal partitions which are not original fabric, and therefore turning the building to more of its natural or original layout. The external appearance of the building would not be altered, and the development would therefore preserve the character appearance of the conservation area, would enhance the listed building. And the development would not harm the amenities of the nearby occupiers through noise, subject to suitable installation between the buildings and between the individual units. There will be no overlooking issues. That element has been removed from the scheme. Beg your pardon. That was, yes.
There was a previous proposal that included a new build, but that has now been excluded.
Pardon, I didn't realise that was on there. That element was part of the original proposal, an original proposal which was removed. The amended plans came in, I think, on the 12th of this month. The current scheme is being re-notified on without that element at the rear. It's just the alterations to the frontage building. Yes, that four-storey, seven flatted proposal was removed 2 weeks ago or so. Reconsultation on the scheme without that element is still being undertaken. The Highways Authority is satisfied with the new scheme, deleting the rear building, subject to conditions regarding the provision of access, turning and parking facilities on the site, and the provision of the cycle parking as proposed in the plans. The individual units are between 17.95 and 31.54 square metres. Three by six, effectively. 3 by 6 square metres.
3 by 6 metres.
Yes. Square metres.
Yes, yeah, 3.
Well, 17.95 is in off 18. 18 is 3 by 6. That's it.
That's in those.
It would bring the listed building that's been vacant for just over 2.5 years back into use, prevent its potential further decay or damage. Well, subject to no adverse comments being made by, or any new issues being made by outstanding consultees responding to the amended plans, the application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions laid out in the report and subject to the completion of a 106 agreement securing public open space, a contribution towards public open space. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Do I remember Conservation Committee saw this before the new build was excluded and they expressed some concern? Is it going back to them as well or not? Okay.
Procedure, if I may. I noticed the next item is granting listed building consent for this property. I just don't know, could you just clarify what the order is? Because we could be making a decision which is going to knock the guts out of this building, and then we're going to ask to preserve it, grade 2 or whatever. How does that work?
The changes to the building to allow the development are removing non-original partitions within the building. The historic fabric, the original fabric of the building is to be retained.
From a procedure perspective, sorry, what Tom is saying is that when we're considering, when his presentation relates both to the planning application and to the listed building consent application, but because they're different parts of the legislation, what we would then do is talk about the general development of the units and the conversion, which includes the listed building consent to change the building over to that use. And then you would have to take two separate decisions. One for, if you were minded to approve this, you would grant the planning permission for the change of use, and then you then have to then make a second vote as to whether or not you're happy with the listed building. So the actual presentation relates to both applications. So sorry, that wasn't made clear when from a procedure perspective, we're looking at both applications and you're considering both at the same time. It's just because it's different bits of the planning legislation, we're dealing with them as two applications and therefore need two decisions to be made on them.
Right, so that, in that case, then, Mr. Chairman, could we say yes to one, but we then couldn't say no to the second, could we?
From a if you were happy with the principle of the change of use, and you then didn't grant listed building consent, they wouldn't be able to, and vice versa. So that's why we're considering presenting them together, because it is intrinsically the same application, but it's the planning application talks about the change of use of the building. The listed building consent actually deals with the change to the fabric of the listed structure. So it's the work to facilitate that change of use. So it's taking out partitions, putting new partitions up, and dealing with the internal configuration of the building. So that's why we're considering them both together. But thank you for clarifying that there is a need to clarify the procedure. Thank you.
Before I move to Lucy, I assume conservation officers happy with the proposal as drafted. Lucy.
I'm actually really, really confused as to what we're actually the application? Is it just the original building? Is it a sort of new build as well? Are the parking spaces, or it just, I'm sorry.
Thing is, it's the existing building. The erroneous showing of a slide with the new build was in the original scheme and it was knocked out fairly early on. It shouldn't have been in there. There's the same footprint, but here we are taking commercial and vacant space and converting with listed consent.
And also historic England as well. And that has concerns about the application on heritage ground. I am the heritage champion. And really, I would just like some explanation on that.
Okay, could I get a picture of the plan of the floor plan with the car parking to rear? The original application or application as submitted talked about the change of use of the frontage building, but within the rear area, to the rear of that, they were proposing a 4-storey block of 7 flats.
Right.
What then subsequently happened, if you can go back one to the previous one, what then happened was, so that was what was being proposed to the rear. We obviously expressed concerns about that. And as a result of that, that 4-storey block was removed from the proposals. So the application that we're dealing with is only relating to the change of use of the frontage building as shown there. The car parking, the parking of the area to the rear remains unchanged from what's there at the moment. So the objection from the and from Historic England basically relates specifically to they didn't have a problem with the conversion, but they were objecting to the 4-storey block to the rear, and hence the reason why that was omitted from the application. So that was taken out, and what we're now dealing with is specifically this change of use, and the listed building consent required to make the changes to allow that to take. Does that help?
Thank you for that.
If I could just add something, members, I just, through you, Chair, I just wanted to add that I do apologise. I've completely forgotten what I was going to say. I'm so sorry.
How important was it?
I'm sure it'll come back to me. Yeah, it was. Oh, I've just completely forgotten. I'm so sorry. I will come back to you as soon as I remember what it is I was going to say. I can only apologise.
Sorry, I got Marjorie first, and I'll come to you, Pat. Marjorie.
Did I hear Tom right when he said that this application is still out for consultation?
The amended plans are, yes. Subject to those comments coming back from the outstanding consultees, not raising any new issues or objections or concerns, the recommendation is for approval.
It just seems a bit premature of us to be considering it then, if it's still out for consultation.
Sorry, members, my point I was going to make is that you'll notice that the recommendation is one where you're asking you to grant delegated authority to the corporate director, subject to being no further issues, objections raised, because of the removal of the building. Officers have reconsulted with the statutory consultees. Their concerns previously were regarding the rear building, and that statutory consultation period hasn't yet expired. So what we're asking, if you delegate approval to the corporate director of planning and governance to issue the permission, provided no new issues are raised as a result of that consultation. I do apologise.
And how far through are we through the consultation period?
The consultation was the 12th of November, which I think takes us 3 weeks, is to the 2nd of December, I think.
So I guess if it, subject to whatever decision we make here, if there are issues that need to come back, they could come back on the 6th, possibly.
Yeah, if we would look at the response that came back, it would be dependent very much on what objection was, if anything new had been raised, and as to whether or not we had that needed to be looked at and further considered. We have done this because all the objections did relate to this 4-storey block to the rear, and now that's gone. From the neighbours had concerns about the relationship. So by omitting it, what we've said is, because that's taking away the really fundamental issue that people were objecting to, we were content to bring it back, just because we obviously have a planning a committee to get it to. If members are not happy that we're bringing it, then you can ask that we bring it back once the consultation period expires. But you know, we brought it forward just so that we can get a decision on it, and if no new issues are raised, then we could obviously move forward with a recommendation with the approval of this, if members are minded to approve of it.
Thank you. Pat?
Thank you, Chair. When I got my teeth into this document, it suddenly occurred to me that it's a bit more complex than the usual. I think the principle of change of use isn't really an issue because, as we know, that's suddenly become more flexible and we don't have a lot of say over it. So that's not really the issue here. I think what is the issue is the heritage status of the building and the fact that it's in a conservation area, and whether or not we think all of that's all right and the interior spaces are all right. So the interior spaces are quite small, and that's constrained by the fact that it is a listed building. So we're kind of stuck with that. We either like it or we don't. I'm more concerned, I suppose, with the fact that it's very close to the city centre on a very busy road. And I'd like to be sure that the airflow in the building is going to be such that you wouldn't necessarily have to open the windows all the time, because, you know, you're only going to get air pollution in there anyway, most days of the week, and maybe not on a Sunday, but that's all. The other days of the week, you certainly would. So I would want to know about airflow in the building. I would want to know that the secondary or double glazing was sufficient to prevent pollution getting in and, you know, create the best insulation possible for the residents. In terms of heritage, and noise mitigation, so all of those issues I think need to be taken up in the conditions, and if they're not, they should be. As for the heritage issue, we know from case law that you have to absolutely destroy a heritage item, for want of a better word, before it's considered to be something we should refuse. And I inquired about the burgage plots on which, you know, that are a significant historic characteristic of this area, and they won't be, in this case, the burgage plot won't be totally destroyed, so we can't say that that's an issue there either. It is a parking-free location, if it needs to be. It's very close to transport hubs, very close to all the amenities of the city centre, so that's quite an excellent point in its favour. It has been vacant for 2 years. It has vacant building credit, which means there's very little affordable housing, only 3.5 units, which is a pity. But again, that's constrained by law. So there's not much we can do about that either. I'm inclined to think that the only worry I have are the things I've mentioned concerning airflow, double glazing or triple glazing, whatever it is, noise mitigation. And it is a condition, so that's been addressed. Other than that, I see there's parking there, and that takes up most of the amenity space, which is a bit of a problem, but I don't know. I'm inclined to think it's going to be okay. because there are so many constraints to this. You either got to approve it or just not, on the grounds that it is a heritage building that can't be altered enough for the purpose. That's the way it is, isn't it?
In relation to this particular application, the issue of noise and air quality is page 3 of the report. In relation to the listed building, there have been quite extensive discussions about the use of the building and bring it back and how best to bring it back into. An important part of the fact that it is recognised, and it's recognised within the report, that the unit sizes are quite small. But as you touched on yourself, Councillor, this is a listed building, it's a heritage asset, and the best way to protect a heritage asset is to bring it back into a use where it will be maintained. And for that reason, the application for which related to the front, the change of use of the front of the building, there's no objection to that, and none of our statutory consultees were of concern, had regard or concern to that element of the proposal, which is why the application was brought forward with the rear element being omitted. So it is an important factor for us, is to actually bring our historic stock back into use to protect it, because once it's being occupied, it's then properly maintained and it protects the future of that heritage asset without us having to get into the situation of buildings becoming at risk and then having to take action to actually protect them. So the best way of protecting a listed building is to bring it into a use. The caveat to that is that we don't, it's not a case of anything goes. We are very careful, and there have been extensive discussions about how that takes place. And our conservation officer, in relation to that, was content that what was being proposed was acceptable.
Yes, I take all that on board, because I do think that buildings should be used, and this has been empty since 2019. Presumably it's been marketed in one way or another and no one wants to take it. I'm a bit concerned that the ground floor is going to be left in commercial use. And I've just looked through and I can't see any sort of restrictions on what that commercial use might be. But presumably the building itself only lends itself to some sort of office work, you know, that sort of thing. The ground floor would be offices. So whatever that might be. They are little places, little studio flats, but there again, I always think of studio flats as being sort of bedsits, usually occupied by one person and just like a base. So I'm quite happy with this. And I do think it's important that the building is used again. But do we have any thoughts about what that ground floor commercial use might be?
It's identified within the application as being Class E, and which carries a whole host of different uses these days, which does give flexibility. One of the problems that you have with commercial premises these days, and why the use class has been changed, is to give much more flexibility into how that space is used. What I would say, however, is that whatever use goes in, you will note that there is a noise condition associated with this. So any future use that falls within use class E doesn't impact upon the amenity of the future occupiers, because one of the requirements is that we will be looking to impose through a noise condition sound insulation measures to make sure that the two separate uses, the two different uses, didn't clash and we didn't have a problem.
Any more questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Right, so this has been empty for 2 years. Of course, we don't know how well it's been marketed, if at all. It hasn't been marketed, and we've just had 2 years of COVID. That could be a reason why it's still empty. And it wasn't, I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago, you may remember, Mr. Chairman, the committee, I didn't, but the committee voted to refuse permission for KFC to have a shop just beyond McDonald's. That's been left derelict for the last 4 years. Nobody's concerned about that, but all of a sudden we have this. So I suspect, you know, that's not the whole story here. However, that's just a comment I make. So I don't think we need to start panicking because something's been left empty for 2 years. It's somebody's asset, and at some stage they're going to want to look after it. But the question for Ms. Hanshett. It's always a pleasure to see Karen at planning committee, and she's looking forward to my question, I'm sure. Parking. Now, the reason I raise parking, Mr. Chairman, is because many people will know that County Council has just conducted its annual viewpoint survey, and of the top 3 issues that concern people in the county and the city is parking. So obviously, parking is an important issue. So could Ms. Hanshett just tell us about the parking situation? We're talking 13 studios, so give or take, that could be 26 people. But let's be conservative and say 13 cars then. Just say only one, but whatever, say have 13 or whatever. Where are they going to park? Because if Ms. Hanshett looks at the second paragraph under highways representations on page 82, it says there are restricted parking bays and single yellow line restrictions in Farrier Street to the rear of the site, which will serve to limit any displacement parking. So my second question, Ms. Hanshett, is why are there parking restrictions at that point? It's a rhetorical question because the answer is because people living there have cars and there have got to be restrictions to ensure that it's not complete gridlock around there. So people living around there already have cars. People moving into here would have cars. Car-free residential is a nonsense because people live there. Well, they'll have cars. It's no good us pretending they're not going to have cars because it's in the city centre. People do things with cars other than go to work or go around the corner to the shops. So where are the cars going to go in an area which already has parking restrictions? Is it going to add to an existing problem? That's my questions to Ms. Hanshett.
Thank you, Councillor Amos. As you've already heard from the officer's presentation, we have accepted this proposal as being parking free. It is in a very central location, very close to the railway station, to all sorts of amenities. So it fully accords with our current adopted streetscape design guide in that it is a central location close to amenities and that there are parking restrictions in place to deter indiscriminate parking that might cause problems in terms of congestion, in terms of bus use. So it fully accords with our current adopted standards. We therefore cannot refuse it. As I've said at previous committees, we are now seeing more and more younger people that are wishing to live in central locations and not choosing to own a vehicle because they have got everything that they need on their doorstep or they've got access to a train station or a bus station. Should the people that move here purchase a car and have a car, then they will have to buy season tickets to park in one of the numerous car parks that there are around the city.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But Ms. Hanshett will know the Arboretum. And I've been told, it's a fact, that they've introduced a residence parking scheme because of the dreadful problems they have in that area. One of the reasons is that student parking. And then I'm told that students don't have cars, so I don't know how they suddenly got cars, but so they have cars. They're young people, they have cars. I don't buy this nonsense that young people don't have cars, they do. So the question is, where are they going to park? I don't particularly want to see young women walking from the Crown Gate car park back to this area at night, because this is the nearest they can get. It's not really satisfactory, is it? So if we're not going to provide parking and people have cars, we have to accept the consequence, which is that people are going to park as near as they can. And on a cold, wet night, it could be a long distance. But if the committee's happy with that, then fine, I'll leave that there. The other question, Mr. Chairman, is, and Councillor Agar made a very good point, as she has today, or as Councillor Udall, we're talking 13. Well, I don't see there's a magic number of 13. Why has it got to be 13? We're talking about rabbit hutches again. I think it's smaller than a rabbit hut, actually, for a little rabbit. These are, it's even smaller than the last lot. Okay, so there we go. But if I can't get through it frontwards, and Councillor Udall can't get through it frontwards, that counts as a rabbit hutch. But either way, the serious point, Mr. Chairman, is why does it have to be 13? Is this because for commercial reasons, or because when you've knocked the guts out of this property, that's as many as they can squeeze in or they want to squeeze in? Because again, it does come to lifestyle. I accept fully that if people want to live in these conditions and they freely do it, then that's entirely a matter for them, nothing to do with me. And good luck to them. But I don't see why it has to be 13. Why can't it be 10, for example? I mean, I don't know. It's a genuine question.
I don't know either, but I suspect.
The simple answer to it is that's what's been applied for. And we've considered that, and working with our conservation officers considered that it's acceptable. That's what's been put in front of us. That's what we've been asked to determine. So we are where we are with that one. And the reason why it's in front of members is to make that decision as to whether or not you consider the proposed development is acceptable and whether a listed building consent should be granted in relation to this proposal.
So presumably, Mr. Chairman, I think I know the answers, but just to clarify, the committee couldn't, in say refusing this, sort of give an indication or preference or whatever, that a smaller number. I know Councillor Udall in another area we've done this. Well, you know, too many rooms in there, that particular one, and which suggested a lower number. Would that be possible in this case, or is it 13 or nothing or refusal or whatever? Because I sense there could be a kind of compromise here, but it seems that that's not on the table.
The application that's in front of us is the one that we must determine. These are 13 planning units, and therefore that they're identified as that, and that's what the planning application is for. If you're not happy, if you're not content with the proposal, then it's entirely within the gift of the planning authority to disagree with that. And then what would then happen is, if they were minded to refuse the application, they'd go away, and then the applicant would then need to come back in again with a pre-app and discuss and start those discussions again about reducing down the numbers of units. But obviously, they've already had that discussion, and it has been extensively discussed with the conservation officer, and it's considered that it's got to a point where, from an officer's perspective, it's acceptable. They are small units, but that was a compromise in terms of bringing this forward. So there were a lot of discussions in relation to the frontage building, and it is considered to be acceptable in its form, and this is why we brought it forward for you to consider.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The final point on that is simply then that we often have these kinds of discussions, and we say, this is it. You know, developers, you know, they're all living in penury. The developers can't possibly do any more, any less, whatever the case is. And then we refuse it, and they come back and suddenly they've managed to reduce it and still make a profit. So I think we're giving up a bit too early on this, but there we are.
Thank you for that. And before you, Lucy, I'd just make the point, I think, that this is indicative of where we might be going in the future, because we're going to have, I fear, a number of over-the-shop premises. I mean, you only need to walk down the high street, and there are lots of second and third stories standing doing nothing. And as the businesses beneath them fail, developers need to come forward. Otherwise, we're going to have a very nasty looking high street. So I think there's a bigger message that goes out about, is this city willing to actually repurpose some of these buildings by way of granting planning permission, or are we going to stick to the absolute, oh, it's got to be this big, or we're not going to do it? And I think that's a bit of a dangerous precedent. So my view on balance would be, you know, they've come up with a scheme, it's conserving a building. Overall, I think it's pretty acceptable, but that's only my view.
Again, I'm sorry, a bit of clarification. The application, I thought it was actually included the parking spaces. Pardon? But it doesn't, because as far as I know,
it's parking free.
Can I
Yeah,
clarify? The residential units are parking free. They have retained the car park that's already in existence for the commercial element that they are retaining. So that parking will be for the commercial element, which is already on site.
I mean, there are two small commercial car parks as well on Sansom Walk that I know of, which isn't very far away, literally just across the road and down Pierpoint, well, not Pierpoint Street, but, you know, so, down the side of the library. There's, you know, there are a couple of them that way. So I don't think that's too much of a problem, not a huge distance. But also, I just say that I think we do need some sort of studio flats in the city. You know, perhaps this is about the best place for them if we're going to have them.
Joe?
I think there will be a lot of young people who love to live somewhere like this, so close to the city centre, so close to the railway station, and I'd like to propose it, to move on a bit.
Seconded by Pat. Marjorie?
Oh, I was going to propose it as well, so.
So it's to grant delegated authorities the corporate director as set out in the recommendation that provided there are no new issues raised at the end of the objection period, subject to a section 106, subject to the conditions set out in the satisfactory listed building consent being granted. So all those in favour? 3, 4, 5, 6. All those against? 2. The application is approved. Secondly, we'll move straight on, Chair, to the listed building consent. And the recommendation for the listed building consent is that that is granted subject to the conditions set out in the report and the grant of a statutory planning permission. All those in favour of that one? 3, 4, 5, 7. All those against? 2. Thank you. So listed building is also granted.
Right, we are now on to agenda item 12. It's all yours, Laura. Speaker problem. Technology won't.
Won't let Laura sign in.
All right, this application is for the erection of a ground and first floor side and rear wraparound extension. There is an existing single-storey side and rear extension at the property on the western elevation that this proposal seeks to replace. There is also an existing rear conservatory and single-storey lean-to extension on the eastern elevation that this proposal also seeks to replace. To provide some context to the application, a previous application was submitted at the site for a similar extension. However, concerns were expressed by officers in respect to the scale and massing, overlooking terracing effect, highways and parking. Pre-application was therefore submitted, and officers advised that it was considered that the principle of residential extension is appropriate at the site and that the amended scheme did successfully mitigate many of the concerns associated with the original withdrawn application. The accompanying report covers all the relevant issues and is taken as read. There is only one late paper in respect of this item, and that addresses a letter of representation received from the applicant. Just a short presentation to illustrate the application. As you'll see on this first slide, it shows the location of the site on Georgina Avenue. The site itself is a substantial plot, as you will also see, due to the corner of the road between Foley Road and Georgina Avenue. Neighbouring properties are sited in a curving formation. Next slide, please. The following next slide just shows some photographs of the site. This image showing the front elevation of the dwelling, adjacent to neighbouring property number 29 Georgina Avenue to the left. And as you can see, there is an existing single-storey side garage at the site. There's also an existing lean-to extension on the other side of the site. Next slide, please. As you can see, next image just shows the street scene looking down the road. Next slide, please. And again, just a further view looking down the road at other neighbouring properties. Next slide, please. Moving to the rear of the dwelling, this photo just shows the rear amenity area facing the side adjacent to number 33 Georgina Avenue, with number 14 Foley Road behind in the distance. As you will also see, the existing single-storey flat roof side garage continues to the rear of the dwelling as a wraparound extension. Next slide, please. So just looking towards the other side of the dwelling now, towards neighbour 29 Georgina Avenue. As you will see, the existing lean-to extension with the pitched roof garage of number 29 just sited behind the fence there. Next slide, please. Another photograph just taken from further down the garden, looking back towards the dwelling. Next slide, please. And this photograph just looks the other way to the rear of the dwellings on Foley Road. Next slide, please. Next photograph just showing the view towards the rear end of the garden. Next slide, please. Next photograph shows the rear window of neighbouring property number 33 Georgina Avenue. And as you can see, again, number 14 just in the background there. As you can see, there is an existing single-storey extension on number 33, which does include a patio door and roof lights above. Next slide, please. The next photograph just shows a side view from the rear garden number 33, looking towards number 31 in the area where part of the extension is proposed to be sited. You can also see that there's a veranda canopy to the rear of number 33 that just provides coverage to a patio area. Next slide, please. Next slide is just showing the proposed block plan at the site in context with the neighbouring dwellings. The dotted red line that you can see, that just shows the 45-degree code taken from number 33. This has been submitted by the agent. Next slide, please. The next slide just shows the existing ground floor plan of the site. The blue dotted line you can see just towards the side and the rear just shows the outline of the proposed extensions. Next slide, please. As you can see, this slide just shows a ground floor plan. It includes an enlarged kitchen, a utility room, an informal sitting room with the proposed parking arrangement just as shown at the front of the site. Next slide. Again, next slide just shows the existing first floor plan, showing the 3 existing bedrooms, the grey L-shaped area, and that white striped area at the rear just shows the roofs of the existing extensions at the site. Next slide, please. Moving on to the proposed first floor, as you will see, the 3 bedrooms are still retained but are extended on the first floor. The extension also allows for an extended bathroom, ensuite, a walk-in wardrobe. As you can see, the proposed single-storey element also does include roof lanterns in the roof. Next slide, please. Moving to the proposed second floor plan, as you can see, a staircase has been included, which would allow the applicants to use the roof space as an additional room with storage to the edges of the room. The next slide, please. It shows the existing front elevation with the proposals outlined by the blue dotted line. Slide, please. Next slide just shows the proposed front elevation with the extension on. Next slide, please. Moving on to the rear again, just shows the existing rear of the site with the outline again in blue. And next slide, please. Again, showing the proposed rear of the site. Next slide, please. Again, this is the other side of the, this is the eastern elevation of the dwelling. Finally, next slide, please. Just finally, this last slide just shows the northern elevation. A number of objections has been received during the course of the application. These are considered in detail in section 7 of the report. However, as the officer report does explain, this is a very balanced case. The key determining issues for members to consider are the design, impacts on the character of the area, and the impact on neighbouring amenities. Officers have concluded that on balance, subject to the recommended conditions, the proposal are acceptable in terms of the design, appearance, and would not have an unacceptable impact on neighbouring residents.
Thank you. Questions, members? Alan.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, apart from the name Georgina, there's nothing to commend this at all. I mean, to be honest, Mr. Chairman, I'm absolutely staggered. Anybody could recommend approval for this. Perhaps the officer can tell us before we start what the percentage is of the extra in relation to the existing footprint of the existing property. That's what I want to know to start with.
Don't have an exact percentage, but if you wanted to pull up the plans again, we could sort of look at the plans just to compare with the outline that's on the existing plans.
Well, I think it's very important, Mr. Chairman, because we're talking about mass and overdevelopment here. If we don't know how much extra that's being lumped on.
Yeah, I think that one. Yeah, that one, but
it's the one with the blue one.
That's it.
No.
Again,
that one.
Yeah. I mean, my concern, but we won't get a view out of this presentation, is if you imagine that bill, how does it compare to the rest of the street scene?
There's a side and the rear. You add that up of the extra in relation to the footprint of the existing property. What is that percentage? Because we always go on that, don't we? By how much extra is it? What percentage is it? Well, what is it? I mean, it's a question.
We can't answer that question for you. If members want the specific, it's not going to be possible to do it today. And if members are insistent upon that, we would have to defer the application to bring it back. The reason why the application has been put forward as it is, with the extent shown of the existing with the blue, is to show the extent of that. So it's for members to decide as to whether or not they insist upon a percentage increase over the floor area, or whether or not they think that the plans in front of them are sufficient for them to make an informed decision as to whether or not they consider this proposal acceptable or not. The officer's report is very balanced, and it does say that it is a very balanced case. It's for members to make that decision, but if you do want us to return it with the percentage increase over the original, we can do that.
Well, I think with all respect, Mr. Chairman, I mean, we should have this. I mean, when we've discussed others, you know, if we're going to talk about, is it too big, not big enough, what, you know, we need some guidelines as to what the footprint is now and what the total extra is, because the proposal is for ground and first floor, side and rear wraparound. I've been on planning committee probably too long. I've heard of extensions. It's the first time I've heard of a wraparound. I don't know whether that's a technical term, but I know if I wrap something around me, it simply makes me look even fatter. So then that's what this does to this property. And I'm concerned that we don't know how much extra big it is. I mean, I'm staggered because what can one say? You know, we've got representations from the neighbours. They are concerned, and we're saying, well, you know, we'll wave it through. I don't know how much bigger it is, but tough luck, you know, it won't affect you. But of course it will. You know, I mean, for what I've seen of it, just on these diagrams, it's an ugly monstrosity. Now, there's no planning law against ugliness, but there is against a monstrosity because it's called overdevelopment. But how can we make a decision without knowing? I'm at a loss. Bill.
This isn't certainly, I'm sorry, I haven't started this thing off. It's done it. We've done it itself anyway. Good. It's a considerable overdevelopment. This is a 1930s residential development. It's a further erosion of light and space in a residential area. If this is applied progressively to other houses in this street, it's going to be one of the most oppressive streets to live in. At the moment, it's as it was designed for. It's spacious, it's light, it's airy, it's not oppressive. This is oppressive, and I move that we reject the application in its entirety as being totally unsuitable for this type of property and in this type of area. Thank you.
Thank you. Just obviously, I'm completely different, but I live in a 3-bedroom. And time has gone on. We have extended, not so much at the back that way. And now I look the odd house because I look too small. So.
Joe?
We keep getting this expression. I'm looking at 8.1 now. The impact of the proposals would not be to such a detrimental level to warrant refusal. So it's all a case of do we think that it's too big, really, isn't it? And that looks very big to me. And I sometimes wonder why people decide to extend their house to such an extent. Why don't they just go for a bigger? But you know, that's not for me. That's not planning consideration. But it does look awfully big, and it just does seem to be too big for the site that it's on. But there again, I'm not sure how you put that in planning terms to actually make a reason for refusal, because to me it looks like overdevelopment.
I mean, the other comment.
After all these years on planning, I ought to be able to come up with a reason, I'm sure, but you know, it just looks overdeveloped.
It's a rare occasion, in all seriousness, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Councillor Hodges. I'm totally on this. I think the word is actually overdevelopment and mass, because if I could just assist Mr. Chairman, I had an email from one of the complainants. Just read out what she said. Because she's not being unreasonable. This is the one right next to it. You know, because I said, you know, extensions happen all the time. I mean, that's not the issue. The principle of extension is not at stake here. And she says, blah, blah, blah. And as I've always said, I'm not opposed to just a single story extension, just to the volume of this one. Volume. So again, it's the size of it. It's not the principle at all. So it seems to me, again, there's a compromise available here. But I think it's, and Councillor Amos there moved refusal, but I mean, the reasons would be overdevelopment and mass, and also completely out of keeping with the local area and out of character. Because if you look at it front on and side on, obviously you can't see the back. It is completely out of character, you know, and I do actually disagree with Councillor Hodges. I mean, if they want a property of that size, then, you know, it's not for us to say, but well, would it not be better to move the house off that can accommodate that? Because you're changing the character of the area, and that is not allowed under planning policy. You can, you know, things will have an impact. It's the degree of the impact, and there's got to be a limit. Otherwise, it is open house.
I mean, the other comment I would make, I'll come to you, is I don't quite understand why the roof line is the way it is, apart from maximising the space inside. Not in keeping with the existing house. It looks like an adjunct. And on that basis, I mean, aesthetics probably don't come into it. Material planning, do they? Oh, fair enough. Aesthetics is one, but that was my comment.
Well, you can tell it's the festive season. Councillor Hodges and Amos are agreeing with each other. It's a season of goodwill to all councillors. Obviously, I'm quite impressed. But perhaps I'll be going out for a meal later. I do not know. But anyway, I have to say I agree with both of them as well. Earlier I talked about little boxes. This is a damn big box, and for that reason, it is a clear overdevelopment of the site. And I'd also, I know Georgina Avenue reasonably well. It's not far from where I live, but I can say that with absolute certainty, this will change the character and the nature of the road and the visual amenity of the house frontages of the street scene. And I think that is a good enough reason to say, no, this is a big box in the wrong place. If you want to do this, get yourself a house which is purpose-built, not this.
Sorry? Go first or Bill? After you, Bill. Yeah, sure.
I'd just like to reiterate what Councillor Amos says, and Councillor Hodges and Councillor Udall as well. This is a complete rebuild. This is not just an extension. This is a complete rebuild and redesign of a 1930s house. It's going to be unrecognisable. And the whole ambience of the area is going to be totally altered. This is not doesn't only apply to this one property. This applies to the whole street. It applies to the whole area of St John's. And this is a dangerous precedent as well. If we pass this, this sets complete rebuild of houses of this style and type in this area. I think this is a gross overdevelopment, and on those grounds, it should be rejected.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, it is as we said when we brought it forward to members, it is a very balanced case, and it is the report has reflected that it is very balanced. It is recognised it is quite a big extension. Listening to what members are saying, yes, you can, if you think it's of a design that is which is detrimental to the character of the area, then that is a reason for refusal. We are talking about, I've heard talk about the size, the mass, the bulk. So if members were minded to refuse it, then you would be looking along the lines of the proposed development by reason of its excessive size, mass and bulk would be detrimental to the, would introduce an incongruous and visually intrusive form of development to the detriment of the character of the area. And that's just off the top of my head. But obviously this as a minded to, we would obviously take that away and come up with and bring it back with a reason for refusal, which was better framed than that, because it's very quickly. But obviously it's entirely up to members. It is a planning balance with this one, and the report was brought forward very much on the basis of it is a planning balance. It is members to make a decision. Officers were of the opinion that it was okay. Members are saying quite clearly that they're not particularly happy with this, and therefore it is for you to make that decision. And if you're unhappy based upon what you've said, then I think that's you could refuse it on the basis of the what you've talked about, which is the size, mass, bulk, and impact.
But double doors.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, in the midst of all this accord, I hate to disagree with Councillor Amos. I mean, there is a law against ugliness in planning terms. You remember the beauty principle? I mean, we're supposed to be looking for beauty, aren't we? This is definitely not beautiful. I'm inclined to go with the majority on this one.
Got a proposal to refuse, Audrey?
I'd just like to say that I agree with everything that's been said. And I'd also like to raise a point that in the letter, I don't know if you read the letter that came with the late papers, they say that the third bedroom is very small. Well, as well as finishing up, according to the plans, they'd get a bigger third bedroom. But what else are they asking for? It's too much just to provide a bigger bedroom for one child. They've got, you know, every possible luxury there. So I'm a refusal.
Add to what Councillor Bissett said, if I may, Mr. Chairman. I think she made a very fair point. Could I just wait another point? In the endless discussions there will subsequently be, if committees does refuse it, could we please ask the developers to just be a bit more careful about their language? Because in the late paper, which we got, they have actually said that the objections received are frivolous and without merit or evidence, and that the objections received present a false representation. I just think that they need just to moderate that a bit, because it's you know, as far as I know, the neighbours have been perfectly reasonable and proper, and I don't think there's any call to call them use that kind of language.
Thank you. So we have minded to refuse. Seconder, please. Marjorie.
So
I might ask for a copy of this.
It's quite all right. The proposal is minded to refuse on the grounds detailed by members. It will be referred back to the future office opinion on the robustness of those grounds. All those in favour of refuse. That's unanimous.
Thank you. We are almost at an end. Any other business? Just to remind members, we've got 2 meetings in December. Hopefully they'll be nice and short, the 9th and the 16th. Any other business? No, we are done. Thank you very much.